Welcome, everybody, to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm Don Frazier.
I'm Paul Fabrizio.
Yes, you are. You had to think about it, though.
Who am I?
And we're working our way through the most important document in American history, line by line.
The Constitution of the United States.
Which is an important exercise for Americans to do, to participate in, if they're going to have an informed conversation. Especially on social media.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Is that possible?
I'm not sure it is.
You think about how often the Constitution actually comes into play in the affairs of government. You think about people who are starting a job with the U.S. government, joining the military. You think about Congress, the President, Supreme Court, district courts, anybody, and how often they have to deal with this document.
And how often they have to swear to defend that document.
Exactly. And we spend, as a country, so much time dealing with this document. It sets the boundaries where we can operate. And I think this next clause gets into that. Because it's going to talk about the militia and the control of the militia by Congress.
So we're in Article 1. Section 8, Clause 16.
Correct.
All right.
Ready? And we're talking Congress shall have the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectfully the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress.
So they really do. Well, they really do believe that the militia is going to be the de facto army of the United States.
Yeah, and yet in our last line that you talked about, you think that's based on a misunderstanding of how wars are fought and won.
Well, and I think that this leans into the idea that they believe that war will be rare, of short duration, and of limited scope.
So you can get these citizen soldiers to the battle, they handle it, then they go back home.
Then they go home. Cincinnatus at the plow.
Because they got to get their crops.
Correct. And even the idea of having an army for 2 years tells you that they're not really anticipating these long drawn-out conflicts. And there's historical precedent for that. There's just not. So when we, as historians, talk about like the 9 Years' War, the 7 Years' War, notice that we're using how long it lasted as a way to describe it. But even in the colonial period, when you had, say, the 7 Years' War, what was the name of that war in the American colonies? The French and Indian War. So it had a specific cause and a specific way to contain it. You know, if you just handle the French and the Indians, then it's all done. 7 Years' War, we have no idea how it starts or how it's going to end. And
what are we fighting for?
You know, what are we fighting for? Well, we don't know because it's not in the name of the war. But in the American colonies, we know exactly what we're fighting for.
The French and the Indians.
And the French are hiring the Indians to lift our hair, so therefore we got to do something with this. But even before that, you had like the War of the Spanish Succession. Queen Anne's War over here.
Okay.
Which tells you, we don't know what this is about other than the sovereign has caused this.
That's right.
And the War of the Austrian Succession, King George's War.
Yeah. We personalize it, don't we?
We do. And we blame it on somebody because despite our reputation worldwide, I don't think we like war as a nation.
Really?
I don't think we're particularly as good at it as some people think either, but that's just me.
We have fought so many.
We have fought so many. Now, what's interesting is you read ancient Roman writers, they say the exact same thing
about Rome.
They say, hey, we don't like war. We weren't looking to pick a fight with anybody. They brought the fight to us. We just finished it. So we don't start them, but we dang sure finish them.
I mean, you're saying this in the context of a situation where we're seeing rising tensions in the Middle East.
Rising tensions, just another rise of tensions.
And Iran is accusing the United States of, in essence, inciting a war.
Well, they've been swinging at us since '79, though.
Right,
so.
but we're taking steps to elevate that risk.
Well, sure, because we saw holes in tankers that we didn't put there.
That's right.
Interesting how that works.
Yeah, I have all sorts of questions about that, but anyway.
Maybe we did put them there. Is that what you're saying? Are you a conspiracy guy?
No, I'm not a conspiracy guy. But you're saying you believe that we don't like war. And I don't disagree with you, but we seem to be always on the lookout for war. And other than a period of time after the Vietnam War, and that ended with the Panama invasion in 1989. So, in other words, a 15-year period.
There was a Grenada thing in there.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah,
it was what it was. We have been basically at constant war since 1990, the invasion of Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying that's not who we are.
Well, I'm saying that's who we have had to become. But that's not who we started as.
So the framers did not anticipate this.
I don't think.
The framers thought we're isolated. We'll project our ships over to other places. But
to protect our commerce. And again, that's a defensive role.
Right.
Enough ships to protect our commerce and to retaliate against people that are, intercepting our commerce. And the first real trial of that was the Barbary pirates.
Right, 1802, 1803, Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, and there were some events with the quasi-war with the French that predated that. But I think that in their minds, we're going to be a nation of small farmers, small D Democrats, that are all following a Republican tradition, small R Republican tradition. And a standing army of the United States just doesn't fit into that.
So, therefore, the emphasis on the militia.
That's it.
Which appears again and again in this Constitution.
Correct. And so the militia will be the expansible army. Keep coming back to that. Now then, it's interesting how they continue to let the states actually have the lion's share of the control. And they say respectfully, we will...
Reserving to the states respectfully the appointment of the officers.
Correct. So each of the states respectfully will have their ability to appoint their own officers, and that militia will take on the timbre and tone, the essence of that state, which is interesting. Because that's not how we do it now, even with the reserve and really the National Guard system.
Right. The militia has evolved into the National Guard. Is that a correct thing to say?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And so the militia, the National Guard today, they're paid for by the national government.
Yes.
They're governed by the state governments, but they're governed according to the rules set up by the Congress.
Correct. And, technically the militia was every able-bodied military-aged male, so 17 to 40, was supposed to be eligible
for the militia,
be called up for the militia. And that's not the case anymore either.
What? Explain what you mean.
Well, I mean, I was never in the militia.
Neither was I.
So therefore, it seems to me like we should have had to turn out a couple of weekends and drill with our muskets and pikes, and we never did.
Swiss?
Yeah.
The Swiss do that.
Well, absolutely, and the Israelis kind of do that too. And so I think that the framers of this document just figured we'd have an armed citizenry that all knew how to use their weapons, but they would only be called out if someone dared to invade our fair land.
Right, and the rest of the time they'd be growing their crops and hunting and all that stuff.
Being citizens, attending town halls, debating with their congressmen.
They certainly had a very limited understanding. I mean, of what they lived in, they had a limited understanding.
Yeah, they figured it was...
They had a good understanding of that, a little bit idealistic, but, I mean, for a document that did so well in so many things, this militia thing is a whole...
It seems to be just slightly out of key.
Yeah.
And so they envisioned what they saw around them, which was an agricultural and commercial
Right.
empire. This is pre-industrial
Right.
America.
Right.
And now we're post-industrial America. And so it's interesting how this document reflects its times and has some of those vestiges still built in.
Which raises the question, we got a couple minutes. Should we then pay that much attention to parts of this document that no longer are as important? For example, this discussion of the militia. Should we give it the weight that we give to other parts of the document?
What I don't understand, and maybe a political scientist can help me with this, why don't we have any lawmakers stand up and say, hey, I was looking at the Constitution, and this whole thing with the militia thing is kind of outdated. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we should build some sort of amendment that has a number of changes across several parts of the Constitution as kind of an omnibus amendment, and see if we can, modify it for the times. But I don't think there's ever going to be the political will for that.
You got it. So why should somebody die on the idea of a political amendment, an amendment to the Constitution about the militia, or going back even further to the number of representatives in a district? Why should someone die on that?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just the political
There's bound
reality.
to be other things to do.
Yeah.
Like throw a cocktail party on your boat.
Yeah. But, I mean, what we need to remember is we're talking about a document that has parts that are just genius and other parts that are just blah.
Or overcome by events.
Yeah. You're being polite. I mean, because, I would argue based on what you said about how the Revolutionary War was won, this whole discussion of the militia really is unnecessary. The framers were guided by political considerations rather than realistic historical.
Well, I could see that argument.
Yeah.
But, which would you rather err on? The side of the yeoman farmer or a standing army?
To get my Constitution passed, I would rely on the yeoman farmer.
Absolutely.
Even though it may not be what's best for the country later on.
The United States has a long history of losing the first battles they're in.
Yeah, we do.
And part of that is because of the way we approach war.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I'm thinking of a quote by Winston Churchill about that. The United States, and I don't remember the exact quote, but the United States will do everything except what is necessary until there's no other choice but to do what is necessary.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the United States.
That's part of our national character.
It is. It is. So I guess we're not here to just praise the Constitution and just explain it, but also, I think, to be properly critical of it. It's held up as a sacred document, in the secular sense of a sacred document. But the reality is it was written by a bunch of human beings.
Correct.
And they had issues, they had political considerations that affected their judgment, and they certainly could not foresee the future. But they did have certain ideas, checks and balances being the main one.
And civilian control of the military, which we've
talked about, that have really served us well, I think.
Correct. Even with all the other Bunions and Harry Warts that may be in here.
Harry Warts, all right. Think of that. The Constitution of Harry Warts. All right.
So that's our line.
That's our line.
All right. We'll have more to talk about. How many more clauses do we have in this?
There are 2 more clauses.
All right. So we're coming to the end of this section, but still grinding it out. All right. We'll be back in the next episode. Thanks.